Chloe Whitmore was the heart of Charleston's sweetest bakery. Marcus Hale was the city's most trusted therapist. On paper, they seemed like a picture-perfect couple, until love curdled into obsession. Now, one is dead, and the other is behind bars, after a cold-blooded killing that shocked a community and shattered the illusion that some people are ever truly safe. In the heart of Charleston, South Carolina, where cobblestone streets met the scent of blooming magnolias, there stood a little bakery that had captured the soul of the city. Sweet Magnolia Pastries, painted in soft pastels and adorned with hanging baskets of lavender and ivy, was a picture of charm and warmth. Its owner, Chloe Whitmore, had become something of a local celebrity. She wasn't born in Charleston, but from the moment she opened her doors 3 years earlier, the city seemed to adopt her as one of its own. Chloe had moved from Atlanta after a failed engagement and a layoff from her job in digital marketing. With no formal culinary training but a lifelong love of baking, she took a chance. What started as a food blog turned into something more ambitious, a storefront bakery that quickly became a haven for students, artists, tourists, and morning commuters. People came not just for the pastries, which were exceptional, but for Chloe herself. She had a gift for making people feel seen, remembered. She greeted customers by name, remembered birthdays, and slipped handwritten notes into takeout bags that read, "You've got this," or "Hope your day is as sweet as you." Her signature treats, lavender honey scones, almond croissants dusted in powdered sugar, and her famous strawberry shortcake became local legends. Bloggers wrote about her, food critics praised her, and influencers flocked to her light-drenched storefront to take photos of her elegantly displayed pastries. But Chloe remained humble. She often worked 16-hour days, starting well into the evening to mop floors and plan out the next day's menu. But while the city saw a vibrant, smiling entrepreneur, Chloe's inner circle knew she was recovering from something much more difficult than a layoff or the stress of small business ownership. Only months before opening the bakery, Chloe had ended a 2-year relationship with Dr. Marcus Hale, a respected therapist with a high-profile clientele. They had met during a mindfulness workshop, where Marcus was a keynote speaker and Chloe had been hired to cater desserts. Their connection had been instant, intense even. Marcus was intelligent, articulate, and composed. On the outside, he seemed like the perfect partner for Chloe, supportive, spiritual, successful. In the beginning, their relationship was easy, even exciting. Chloe found comfort in Marcus's stability, his encouragement of her dreams, and the way he listened so carefully when she spoke. But over time, his support gave way to subtle control. He began to critique her spending, question her friendships, and make her feel guilty for focusing too much on the bakery. What had once felt like love began to feel like obligation. Chloe eventually realized that Marcus didn't want a partner, he wanted possession. When she finally broke things off, he didn't explode or plead. He simply said he understood. But the way he said it left her unsettled. There was a coldness in his acceptance, an absence of genuine emotion that made her wonder what he might be thinking beneath the calm exterior. After the breakup, Chloe threw herself fully into Sweet Magnolia Pastries. Her business grew, and with each passing month she seemed lighter, freer. Friends noticed that she smiled more. She spent weekends at local markets, hosted baking classes, and even began talking to someone new, a rising star chef named Evan Reed, who worked at a nearby seafood restaurant. Their relationship was casual, still developing, but it made Chloe laugh again. Still, those closest to her noticed she avoided talking about Marcus. Whenever his name came up, she changed the subject. A few friends suspected that Marcus hadn't fully moved on, but there was no clear reason to worry. He hadn't contacted her, hadn't made any public gestures, hadn't shown up at the bakery. He had simply disappeared from her life, just as silently as he had entered it. But silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means something darker is taking shape. Unseen and quietly waiting, Chloe continued to live her life, pouring sugar and butter into her dreams, unaware that someone was still watching from the shadows. Dr. Marcus Hale was, to the public eye, the very definition of composed. With neatly pressed shirts, a quiet voice, and the practiced ease of a man trained to listen more than speak, he had built a reputation in Charleston as a trusted therapist. His clients included professionals, young couples, and even high-profile figures seeking discretion. His office, tucked into a quiet corner near the riverfront, was filled with soft lighting, warm wood tones, and calming scents, designed to put others at ease. To most who knew him casually, Marcus seemed to have it all: intelligence, success, charm, and emotional stability. But beneath the surface of his well-kept image was a man who struggled with losing control. When Chloe left him, Marcus did not rage. He did not cry or beg. Instead, he accepted the breakup with a nod and a cryptic wish for her continued growth. But inwardly, something had cracked. Chloe hadn't left him because of a single moment or argument. It was a slow drift, one caused by an accumulation of subtle power struggles, possessiveness disguised as concern, and emotional distance that had widened into something untenable. Her departure wounded Marcus's pride more than his heart. To him, Chloe wasn't just a lost partner, she was proof that someone could slip from his grasp without his permission. In the weeks after their separation, Marcus kept his routines intact. He continued to see clients, offered gentle advice about setting boundaries, and gave workshops on emotional resilience. But behind closed doors, a different pattern emerged. His home became a place of isolation. He stayed up late watching Chloe's bakery content on social media, zooming in on photos of her smiling with customers, carefully noting new items she introduced. When she began dating again, quietly, cautiously, Marcus noticed immediately. He saw a tagged photo of her at a downtown food festival, standing beside a man he didn't recognize. The man had his hand on Chloe's waist. The image burned in Marcus's mind. He began to record these moments, creating a file on his computer with screenshots, saved posts, and time-stamped notes about Chloe's daily habits. It wasn't rage that fueled him, at least not at first. It was a need to understand, to analyze, to figure out how she could move on so effortlessly while he still felt the sting of rejection. He justified it as curiosity, then concern. He told himself she was being careless, that she didn't see the world as clearly as he did, and in his twisted logic he began to believe that Chloe owed him something: an explanation, an apology, or at the very least her attention. He started driving past her bakery late at night. At first it was just to see if she was still there, working late as she often did. Then it became more deliberate. He timed her routine: when she arrived to open, when she took breaks, when she locked up. He sat in his car, watching the soft glow from the kitchen windows, unnoticed in the early morning stillness. It was like revisiting a life that had once belonged to him, a place he had been welcomed and then pushed out of. Each sighting made the emptiness inside him feel louder. To those still in his life, Marcus remained unchanged. He was courteous, articulate, even helpful. He volunteered at a local mental health nonprofit. He offered free sessions to veterans. No one suspected that his inner world was quietly unraveling. He had become skilled at compartmentalizing, keeping his darkest thoughts locked away behind the polished mask of professionalism. But the mask was slipping. Subtle signs emerged. Clients noticed he seemed distracted during sessions. His once perfectly neat office started to look slightly disorganized, and he began canceling appointments last minute. He told people he was overworked, just taking time to reset, but in reality, his mind was fixated on Chloe. She was moving forward, baking, laughing, smiling with someone else. In his mind, she wasn't just living, she was thriving without him, and that, more than anything, felt like betrayal. The idea of letting go, of truly releasing her from his orbit, was unbearable. He convinced himself she had made a mistake. that she didn't understand what she had lost. And when someone refuses to accept that love has ended, when obsession is allowed to masquerade as heartbreak, the mind can begin to justify anything, even actions that once seemed unthinkable. 3 weeks before her death, Chloe Whitmore began to notice things that didn't quite make sense. It started with her car tires, slashed clean through on a quiet Tuesday morning as she prepared for a delivery run. The bakery was already bustling when she discovered the damage, and though it delayed her plans, she laughed it off as bad luck. She told her assistant it was probably a random act of vandalism, something that happened when you park downtown too often. But something about the clean, deliberate way the slashes were made seemed intentional, even personal. She didn't file a police report, chalking it up to a city annoyance, unaware that it was the first real warning. A week later, Chloe arrived at the bakery one morning to find an envelope wedged beneath the front door. There was no return address, no markings on the outside. Inside was a single sheet of paper, printed, not handwritten, filled with bitter accusations and vague threats. The message accused her of betrayal, of playing the victim, and claimed that she didn't deserve the happiness she flaunted online. It was unsigned, and the phrasing was strange, like someone trying very hard to sound calm but failing to hide their fury. Chloe read it twice, then quietly folded it and placed it in the trash. She didn't mention it to her staff or her new boyfriend, Evan. Maybe, she reasoned, it was a disgruntled customer or an unstable stranger who had taken her friendliness the wrong way. Still, the words lingered in her thoughts for the rest of the week. Chloe had always been careful about boundaries. Her life was visible, but only to a point. Her social media, while filled with pastries and bright smiles, rarely included personal details. She didn't post her exact routines, and she never tagged her location in real time. But even with caution, visibility came with risks. She had built a brand around warmth and openness, and now that openness felt like a vulnerability she couldn't defend. What she didn't know was that Marcus Hale had been watching. Not in the obvious way. He didn't stand outside the bakery or flood her phone with messages. He was careful, methodical. He followed her online activity silently, from accounts that couldn't be traced back to him. He kept tabs on Evan, too, learning his name, his workplace, even his favorite bar. Marcus created a digital scrapbook of their life together, not out of nostalgia, but out of growing resentment. Every new detail was a fresh wound to his pride. By mid-spring, Marcus had stopped seeing patients altogether. He claimed to be on sabbatical, citing burnout, but he was using the time to sink deeper into obsession. He began studying Chloe's routine, down to the minute, what time she unlocked the bakery, how long she stayed after close, when she took delivery calls, and when she walked to the cafe down the block for her midday coffee. He even memorized the routes she took when driving home. It wasn't just tracking. He had started preparing. He bought a handgun legally through a local dealer, stating it was for home protection. He signed the papers, passed the background check, and picked it up without raising a single red flag. The weapon stayed in his home for days at first, locked away. Then he began taking it out in the evenings, holding it, aiming it at nothing in particular. It became part of his nightly routine, like brushing his teeth or checking the lock. In his mind, this wasn't about violence. It was about restoring balance. Chloe had upended his life, and then carried on as if he never mattered. She had made him invisible, and with each passing day he convinced himself more deeply that he had to do something to reclaim the narrative. In his warped sense of justice, he believed that Chloe had wronged him in a way that couldn't be undone with time. Her new life, her laughter, her moving forward. It all felt like a personal attack, and the more he fed that belief, the more dangerous his thoughts became. No one saw the danger building. There were no public outbursts, no police complaints, no obvious signs of stalking. To everyone around them, Chloe and Marcus were simply two people who had gone their separate ways. But beneath that illusion was a storm gathering strength, quiet, patient, and ready to strike. It was a bright Tuesday morning in Charleston, the kind of day where the sunlight seemed to settle gently on the sidewalks and the breeze carried the scent of freshly bloomed dogwoods. Sweet Magnolia Pastries had just opened its doors, and as usual, Chloe Whitmore was already inside, flour dusting her apron, hands deep in preparation for the morning rush. Her assistant, Grace, arrived at 6:45 a.m. to find Chloe humming along to soft music, pulling a tray of raspberry danishes from the oven. The mood was cheerful, calm. By 7:15, the line outside had begun to grow, as it did nearly every weekday. Locals loved starting their morning with Chloe's pastries. On that particular morning, a mother and her toddler waited patiently behind a pair of college students, while a man in a business suit checked his phone, standing in line for his usual almond croissant and black coffee. It was a typical start to what should have been just another peaceful day. But at 7:20 a.m., the peace shattered. Two sharp, echoing cracks rang out, and within seconds, screams replaced the quiet hum of the morning. People dropped their coffee cups and dove for cover. Someone yelled to call 911. A man in a dark hoodie was seen sprinting away from the bakery, darting across the street and disappearing into an alley. Panic rippled through the block. Some thought it was a robbery, others believed it was a random act of violence. Inside the bakery, Chloe lay collapsed near the display counter, blood pooling beneath her body. She had been shot twice, one bullet striking her chest, the other tearing through her neck. The impact had thrown her backward, knocking over a rack of pastries and sending glass shards from the front display scattering across the floor. Her eyes were open, but she was no longer breathing. Grace, who had been in the back kitchen, ran to her side, screaming her name as customers fled in terror. The paramedics arrived in less than 5 minutes, but it was already too late. Chloe had died almost instantly. The bullets had done catastrophic damage, piercing her heart and carotid artery. The entire event, from the shooter's entry to his escape, had taken less than 30 seconds. The news spread fast. By noon, the story was all over social media and local television. Popular Pastries owner shot dead in morning attack. Vigils began forming before the sun had even set. Candles, notes, and photographs lined the bakery's windows. Customers left flowers, hand-drawn signs, and even baked goods with messages like, "Thank you, Chloe," and "You made our morning sweet." Detectives immediately ruled the shooting a targeted act. Nothing was stolen. The register hadn't been touched. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses showed the suspect arriving on foot, wearing gloves and a hood. The attack had been efficient, precise. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was something much more personal. As investigators dug into Chloe's life, they found nothing to suggest criminal activity or threats from strangers. She was well-liked, admired, and known for her generosity. But when they reviewed her phone records and recent messages, a familiar name emerged: Marcus Hale. At first, it seemed unlikely. He had no criminal history, no known history of violence. But as detectives looked deeper, patterns began to emerge. Chloe had received anonymous, threatening messages. Her car had been vandalized. She'd grown more cautious in recent weeks, though she hadn't gone to the police. Her social media had been viewed from suspicious accounts later traced back to Marcus through digital forensics. When investigators checked Marcus's GPS history, they found a disturbing detail. He had been within 1 block of the bakery at the exact time of the shooting. His phone pinged near the alley where the suspect was last seen. And then there was the most damning clue of all. When they searched the area days later, police dogs led them to a shallow patch of dirt behind a park near Marcus's home. There, wrapped in a gym bag and partially buried, was a handgun. Ballistics testing would later confirm what detectives already suspected. It was the weapon used to end Chloe Whitmore's life. What had started as an ordinary morning at Charleston's most beloved bakery ended in the kind of horror no one could have predicted. But even more chilling than the act itself was the realization that the person behind it had once been welcomed into Chloe's life, her business, and her trust. The arrest came quietly, without resistance. Marcus Hale was found at his home, sitting in a dimly lit living room surrounded by unopened mail, untouched food containers, and a half-packed suitcase he never got around to zipping. His expression when the officers entered was calm, detached even. He offered no explanation, asked no questions. He simply stood, hands extended, as if he had expected this moment for a long time. The man who once lectured on emotional regulation and trauma recovery had become the architect of a murder that shattered a city and left a hole no one could fill. In the days following Chloe Whitmore's death, investigators built a case that painted a devastating picture of obsession, control, and unraveling mental stability. The digital trail Marcus left behind was substantial and damning. Forensic analysts discovered a folder on his laptop titled Closure, filled with screenshots of Chloe's social media posts, photographs of her and Evan taken from a distance, and dozens of drafted letters never sent. The tone ranged from apologetic to threatening, each one revealing a man oscillating between longing and rage. Search histories from his devices uncovered a chilling progression. Weeks before the shooting, he had looked up terms like how to make a clean kill, fastest ways to shoot someone, and how long does it take police to track phone GPS. One query read, "How long does grief last when you lose someone who left you?" There was no doubt that Marcus had planned Chloe's murder with precision. The act wasn't born out of sudden rage. It was deliberate, calculated, and rooted in a twisted desire to reclaim control over someone who had already chosen to walk away. At trial, the prosecution detailed every unsettling piece of evidence. Jurors listened in silence as they heard how Marcus had mapped out Chloe's routines, how he had stalked her movements for weeks without her knowing. They saw the recovered footage of him walking calmly down the alley near Sweet Magnolia Pastries only minutes before the shooting. They were shown the messages found on burner email accounts, linked to IP addresses near Marcus's home and office, and they listened as expert witnesses explained the psychological profile of a man consumed not by grief, but by entitlement. The defense attempted to argue diminished capacity. They presented testimonies from former colleagues and clients who described Marcus as compassionate, intelligent, and deeply dedicated to his work. They brought in a psychiatrist who suggested Marcus had suffered a mental breakdown triggered by abandonment trauma. But these arguments crumbled under the weight of premeditation. Marcus hadn't acted impulsively. He had planned. He had purchased a weapon, scouted the scene, and executed the act without hesitation. After only 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. The judge, during sentencing, called the crime an act of pure, calculated cruelty and imposed the maximum penalty: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Marcus showed no visible emotion as the verdict was read, only a slow nod, as if acknowledging the end of a long game he had always intended to lose. For the city of Charleston, the trial offered a small sense of justice, but no real comfort. Chloe's death left a permanent void, not just in the lives of her family and loved ones, but in the fabric of the community itself. Sweet Magnolia Pastries never reopened. Evan Reed, her partner at the time of her death, quietly left Charleston and never returned. He later opened a restaurant in New Orleans, naming one of the desserts Chloe's Lemon Tart, a quiet tribute to the woman who had inspired him. Her friends organized an annual baking fundraiser in her name, donating proceeds to domestic violence prevention organizations and mental health awareness programs. They vowed to keep her memory alive not through grief, but through the kind of warmth and kindness she had offered so effortlessly during her life. In the end, Chloe Whitmore was not remembered for the way her life ended, but for the way she had lived. Sweetly, generously, and with open arms. But her story served as a tragic reminder. Sometimes, the greatest danger comes not from strangers, but from those who once stood closest. Hidden behind the mask of love, obsession waits quietly, and when left unchecked, it can become fatal.